There's an awful lot going on in that film, and I'll start to dig into that in a minute. But maybe I'll start off with a prosaic question. As the co-producer on this film, what were your sort of duties in terms of the production?
Oh, well, a little bit of everything.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris and I started working on another project, and we decided, let's do something that we can make for less. And Chris came up with an idea. We talked about it in bed a few nights, and then he wrote it. And we just started building stuff. We started building props and costumes in our living room, and just we had a lot of really wonderful people that helped us make it happen, and a lot of luck. But yeah, everything from casting to craft services, I did.
Wow. And also in terms of the casting, giving yourself the role of a badass.
No, I wasn't the badass.
Oh, okay. Well, from a certain point of view.
I mean, are you talking about Francesca?
Yeah.
That wasn't me.
Oh,
Interesting though, I was Laurel.
Okay.
Interesting though, because when Chris wrote, it's all right. I mean, no, people actually don't recognize me from this film quite often because the makeup it was a different look. But when Chris wrote Laurel for me, and then he wrote Francesca, but Francesca was actually a man originally.
Oh, okay.
And I said, no, make that a woman. I'm always trying as much as possible to tip the scale. And I said, we need more women, let's make it a woman. And it ended up turning into this really, really cool role. And I wanted it. I was like, I want to play that role. And he's like, no, Jessica, Laurel is the role I wrote for you. And in hindsight, I'm very glad. Nicole Da Siva was amazing. She's some of you probably know her from Wentworth. She's a wonderful actress and a wonderful person, and we were really lucky to have her on.
So the plot mixes up all sorts of different things, concerns about AI, the way that we're all kind of plugged into networks and how that might, intrude even further onto our lives. The idea of how do you do a locked room mystery in a different way that hasn't been done before, and then of course all of the noir trappings. When you were discussing the making of the film with Chistopher, were those kind of things that he was discussing as he was writing the script, or was it a bit of a surprise when you saw the finished?
No, we were absolutely discussing them. Yeah,
Okay.
All of those elements were seeds at the beginning, and then Chris is a brilliant artist. He's also a PhD in philosophy and a meditation teacher like me, and so he pulls from a lot of different wells. And his mother was a famous poet, so there's just a lot that he pulls from, and he had all of these sorts of ideas, and we just kind of hashed them out, and and then he sat down and he wrote this thing very, very quickly. It was kind of shocking how fast he wrote it. I mean, there were revisions, of course, but yeah, he just got the idea blossomed, and he just sat down and let it out.
And obviously when you're making a low budget film, having the majority of the action in one set with 4 actors makes it an awful lot easier.
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the idea. Is that the other project needed more money, and it needed, it was just a bigger project, and so we wanted to do something that we could do, and as independent filmmakers, just getting it done, right? And so we wanted to be able to get it done, and we were, again, very lucky with the way that everything worked out with our location and everything. And then as we ended up getting a little more money, more investors signing on, we were able to expand the world out of the room and into other places as well, but originally it was all just going to be in that room, so.
Because it was originally paid for by an Kickstarting campaign.
No.
Yeah, it's the reverse. I can't remember the other name.
Yeah, well, we started.
Indiegogo, that's the one.
Well, we went to Indiegogo for our
Yeah.
post-production,
Right,
but
okay.
production was all paid for by our beautiful investor team that our executive producer Clark D. Schaefer put together, and then when it was time for post, we could have made post take 5 years, but we did an Indiegogo, and it took more like 2. So. Yeah.
Because I had a look at the Indiegogo page and I saw that you had stretch goals. So obviously there was a point where you had enough money to make the movie, and I guess you'd have been happy with that film, but then getting a little bit more meant you could do a bit more SFX and make it a little bit more immersive.
Yeah, again, we ended up having all this really interesting, cool luck, and we just had very talented people want to be involved and to be able to do it at maybe a rate lower than what they normally would. Like our crew, our gaffer Grip had just come from, I don't know, some huge blockbuster film, and he had this little chunk of time, and he came and worked for us for like, nothing. It was like barely anything compared to what he gets paid, and it was like, that was all along the way. Everybody really jumped on board and brought passion and generosity to the project, and without the team of wonderful people we had, it wouldn't have happened. So,
Well, I guess if you've got a good script that you can show to people that is kind of like cerebral and thought-provoking, then perhaps it makes it easy to get people on board.
Yeah, I think it was something they hadn't seen before. Like Nicole, for example, she's very, very successful and famous in Australia and has a big following, and for her it was just, this is something interesting, I haven't seen this before, and that was enough to get her involved. So yeah, and it also helped that we had a few shorts that were out on the circuit that that did well, and went to a lot of festivals and won awards, and that made people more excited about getting involved in this as well.
In terms of the kind of film noir dialogue, it's kind of, it's very stylized, it's quite unusual in the modern age. Do you read it as that when all the people in the world are starting to plug into the Tangle, perhaps film noir has become a popular sort of like skin for people to absorb, and that's why people are talking like this?
Well, the whole world isn't necessarily talking like that.
Sure, but maybe whatever city.
Some people are. Honestly, I do not remember where that really came from, except that when you're making one of these tiny budget films, it's so important to have ideas, to have something different. And we really loved the language in the independent film from years ago called Brick. And Chris really borrowed from that a bit with here. And also one of his favorite films, or his favorite film I think, is Blade Runner. And so obviously that noir sense came from that as well. Yeah.
Okay, does anyone in the audience have any questions? Yep, at the back.
Yeah, in the opening scenes, it almost felt like it was a psychotic episode, like it was very schizophrenic. Did you reference like that material? Did you research around that? Was that intended, or?
Around what?
So, when you've got the shot coming up from behind and you can just hear the interrogators but you can't see them, it almost feels quite like a psychotic episode.
Oh.
As if like he's schizophrenic and like hallucinating. Was that intended, or was that just organic?
It wasn't organic, I don't think. I wish Chris was here, but definitely we wanted to disorient in the beginning, because it is very disorienting. The idea is, he's been on Tangle for, what was it at that point? I forget now. I think it's 3 years that he'd been on Tangle, and to be off Tangle after that time, I say at one point Tangle withdrawal, and so for him it is like a psychotic episode. So yes, it was intentional in that way. Yes.
Any others? Yep, over there.
Yeah, I have a question in regards to the influence on the film. This is kind of a deep cinephile question. Have you guys seen the Stephen Hopkins film Under Suspicion with Morgan Freeman and Gene Hackman?
I don't know.
Which is a remake of it's a remake of a French film, but like a large portion of the beginning reminded me. It was almost like a science fiction variation of that film.
I don't remember hearing that reference when Chris was writing, but it's absolutely possible. And if you can reach out to him, he's, I think, I don't know what he is on Twitter, Christopher Soren Kelly on Instagram. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but thank you.
There was one in the row behind. Unless I'm making that up.
Yeah, I just wanted first to thank you for what I thought was a beautiful film.
Thank you.
The kind of the poetry influence. It's kind of half Chandler and half E. Cummings or something in terms of the dialogue, which was just beautiful and amazing shot. You can say this is not the kind of question to answer, but I guess I was just interested in your view as to whether Cleo was ever a real person, or was fully an AI, or is that entirely for us to make our own minds up on? I think there are clues either way. You might want to not answer and leave people to come up with their own interpretation. But yeah.
Well, certainly we're open to people coming up with their own interpretations. For me, Cleo was very much a real person, but not a person like me.
Good answer. Thank you.
I think there's a young man here, right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question's a bit more about you as a person. Would you be connected to the Tangle, or would you be a naturalist?
Oh, it's such a good question. I would be connected to the Tangle. I think it's inevitable. I think I'm already connected to the Tangle. It goes in my pocket all day, every day. It's the only way I know how to get around this city. It's how, I'm connected with people. It's a different version, but it's already so much in that direction, and I have not sworn off technology. So my guess is, just like I've evolved right along with technology to keep leaning into it, I most likely would continue. That's my guess. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, over there.
Really interested in the Coleridge poem and when that became a part of the script. If you know, I loved hearing it. I loved hearing all of it. It's so great, and I think it really nailed what that poem's about in a way I never imagined. So I'm curious as to when that became part of the script.
I'll be excited to share that comment with him. It was there in the first draft. So yeah, like I said, poetry was a part of his life since he was born, before he was born, because his mother was a poet, and his mind is beautiful, and he knew exactly what he was doing with that poem. So I'm glad that it worked for you.
Okay, one more. Yep, over there.
If everyone's okay with me having two.
I'm okay.
I'm not sure if this is sort of like a reference question again, but have you ever read or heard of Pandora's Star by Peter F. Hamilton?
I have not, but I wouldn't be surprised if Chistopher had. Again, I didn't write it, and while I love sci-fi, he is more of the sci-fi expert. But you can find him on all the social media. He would love to answer these kinds of questions.
So it draws on this concept in that book. They have a concept of the cybersphere. You can access TSIs and sort of virtual elements and stuff like that, and you have the secured banks and stuff like that. So it seems like there's a lot of parallels, which is really interesting to see.
Yeah.
This was more utopian than that, because that was still in its infancy. Sort of, it's the in-between stage. So you've got the grid. It's not like an instantaneous change. So it's quite interesting to see, make the parallels between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you haven't read it, and everyone else here, if you haven't read it, definitely read that.
What was your second question?
That was the second.
That was the second question.
Were there?
We let him.
Sorry.
But
It's very bright.
It does feel like it's something in the zeitgeist though, because I can't remember if it was last year or the year before we showed a film by a young filmmaker where everyone has a kind of augmented reality app that's on all the time, and it makes them feel like they're in a nice world, and when you turn it off you realise they've kind of got radiation poisoning and they're living in the ruins.
Well, that's actually happening right now. We're all addicted to our phones, and we have no idea what that blue light is doing to us ultimately, so just saying.
And on that bombshell, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.